Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Thanks for joining me. Today's video is another knit along guide. This one will be to my custom knit and crochet hoodie. It's this one right here. So you can grab the pattern for the hoodie. There's a link in the description to this video, or there's also a link in the description to just the hood part. If you're following along with this video, you won't need the pattern to make the body or the sleeves. Basically, this sweater that I am wearing right now, I will guide you through on how to make this version of it and finish off the neckline. If you want to add the hood, you'll just have to grab the hood pattern, and then this video will also show you how to attach the hood. If you're following along with the pattern and you only want to find out certain parts of the information, you can just check in the description as well. I'll have timestamps of each section as we're working through. If you're going to make the whole sweater from this video, you might need to pause it, so those will help as well, but otherwise, we're just going to get into the whole thing. Okay, so before you get started on anything, you're going to need to make a couple of gauge swatches. So we have one crochet gauge swatch, and this is done with half double crochets in both loops. And we have a knit swatch, and I did this of knit purl, so that you have knit all on one side here. Okay, so here we have our our gauge swatches for our knit and our gauge swatch for our crochet. These are going to be important when we're making our equations to decide how many stitches we need to cast on, how many rows we're going to do, how many rows we're doing for the sleeves, and how many decreases we're doing for the sleeves. So first we need to know what our knit gauge is. So it's 3 inches by 3 inches. Our knit, we're going to do the width, which will be how many stitches in a row, how many stitches in a row, by our length, which will be how many rows we're going to do. And then we're going to write down our crochet one as well, our width times our length in 3 by 3 inch. Okay, so we're gonna measure our gauge swatch here. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and almost 7. So 6.5. And then our length, which will be how many rows, is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and a half. 9.5. And then for our crochet width, 3. Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So 11 stitches in our row, and our length is going to be basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, almost 8. So we can use 7.5 or 8 I'm just going to use 7.5. Okay. Okay, so to start the body, or to do the body, the first things that we need to know is how many stitches we're going to cast on, and then we need to know how many rows we're going to work up. So for the cast on, we need to measure our width because we need to know how wide we want the sweater to be. Make sense? So this is you. You want to measure shoulder to shoulder, or measure your bust width, or measure your hip width, whatever is the widest part between your shoulders, bust, or tummy, or whatever, whatever's the widest part of you, because that's what you want to base your width off of so that it fits the widest part of you. Make sense? For the shoulder measurement, because you want your sweater to sit, the edge of it, of the body, is going to sit over your, over the edge of your shoulder here, kind of. The sleeve is going to start just like after the round of your shoulder. So when you start your measurement, basically if you put your hand on your shoulder, if you're doing a shoulder measurement, you're going to measure from where your pinky is sitting there. So kind of, this would be helpful if I had someone to help me here, but measure across and then across to the other one. So mine is about 22 inches if I put my arms up. If you're doing your bust, kind of measure from the side. You can measure all the way around and divide by 2 if you want to, but kind of just measure side to side here. So I ended up with 20 inches, which I would say if you're going to measure here, maybe take both measurements and go with the bigger one, obviously, because you're not going to want to measure one part and it end up smaller in others. But if you're measuring your bust, I would probably add a couple inches anyways, because you're going to want a little bit of room and give in your sweater. And if you're doing your like waist or your hips, again, just like halfway around. Okay, so when I measured, mine is my shoulders. So I measured my shoulders, and that was, I'm just gonna do the equation over here actually. So my shoulders were 21, or sorry, I'm lying to you. My shoulders were 22 inches wide. Okay, so now we need to figure out how many stitches we're going to need to knit to fit into 22 inches. Does that make sense? So we're going to take our gauge swatch over here. We did a 3-inch swatch, so we're gonna divide 22 by 3. Got my trusty calculator here, so 22 divided by 3. So we got 7.3. And then we're going to take that number, 7.3, and we are going to multiply that by, so because basically we have 7.3 3-inch swatches in our thing. So we did 6.5 stitches in each 3 inches. So we're going to do 7.3 times 6.5, and that times 6.5 is 47.6. So we're going to round that up to 48. Now in my pattern, for the ribbing that we cast on, it's 2 stitches smaller than the rest of the part, just so the ribbing is a little bit tighter. We have an increase. You'll see that when you start working. But yeah, so we're going to take that, we're going to subtract 2 equals 46. So our cast on number is 46. So basically the number you got minus 2. And then total number of rows. So now you're going to measure from your shoulder down to wherever you want your sweater to end. So hips, past your butt, you want it cropped, wherever. Measure to wherever you want your sweater to stop. How long you want your sweater to be. So I kind of want mine You should probably stand up to do this, but I want mine to like sit kind of where my pants are here. I'm gonna stand up actually. There we go. Okay, so you're gonna go from the top of your shoulder and then just measure down to where you want it to sit. So I'm gonna go about 19. So that's gonna be length. Or I guess slash rows, but you're going to work. Okay, so we're taking this number. So when I measured mine, I got 19 inches. We're going to again divide that by 3 because we need to know how many times our swatch fits into that, divided by 3. So we've got 6.3. 6.3 times how many rows were in our 3 by 3? 9.5. 9.5. 6.3 times 9.5, 60. So we are going to work 60 rows into our sweater. We're ready to cast on. One thing I just should have mentioned before is that whatever color you're going to be doing over your shoulder, just make sure you have 2 sources of it before you start. So if you need to, you can like take from your main source and just roll up a little bit. You're only going to need enough for probably like 1 full row, about that amount. So even if you just roll up like a little ball like that, and put it off to the side and save it, just to make sure that you have it there, because you're going to separate into 2 sides just for a couple of rows over the shoulder. So again, that's just going to be in the color that you're using over your shoulder. But aside from that, you can cast on. So, okay, so I'm just going to take like my arm's length and probably like a foot more, approximately. So like, I don't know, I would say, yeah, 2 meters as a tail. Okay, so I've cast on my 46 stitches, and now for the ribbing, I'm going to start with a knit stitch. I'm just going to alternate between knit stitch and purl stitch. So knit, purl, knit, purl, oh, purl, and just work down to the end. Knit 1, purl 1. Okay, so pay attention to what you do as your last stitch. Mine will be a purl because I have an even number of stitches. If you had an odd number of stitches, and you started on knit, you're going to end on a knit. Make sense? Okay, now that was row 1. So we're going to flip over and do row 2. And so I ended on a purl stitch. No, what did I say? Yeah, purl stitch. So when we flip it over, we know a knit stitch and a purl stitch are just the opposites on the opposite side, or on the other side, right? So row 2, since the last stitch was a purl on the other side, it's going to have to be a knit on this side. So I'm just going to basically work this row the same. Knit, purl, and work down. So if you ended your last row on a knit, then you're going to want to start this row on a purl. Make sense? So you're just going to continue to do this for 7 rows total. Okay, so now that you've completed the 7 rows of ribbing, we're going to be on row number 8. I'm going to take 2 stitch markers and count 10 stitches in from, 10 stitches in from each end. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so this will be row number 8, and we're just going to knit across the row. Knit. Up to our 10th stitch, well, up to and including the 10th stitch. 9, 10. And then our next stitch, we're going to do a knit increase. So you're going to find the bar that's between the 2 stitches, not the bar that's part of the purl stitch, but it's right here between the 2 stitches. You're going to pull that up and onto your left needle. You want it to be open towards your right needle here, if you can see that. And then you're just going to do a knit stitch into that stitch. It's kind of tight here, but pull off. And that will give us a knit increase. Then you're going to knit up until you get to your next stitch marker that you put in. Okay, so now your 1 stitch before where you put the stitch marker, or there's 10 more to go on the row, and you're going to pick up that bar again, slide it onto your left needle, and then knit the stitch. Look. Just going to remove this because it's kind of in the way now. Okay, so that was your 8th row. So now now that you've increased 2 stitches, you should have the number on your needle that you need to cover your total width. So yeah. So we just did a full knit row, and now you're just going to do a full purl row. And then we're just going to work like that. Knit 1 row, purl 1 row, so that on your right side it's all knit stitches showing. And yeah, so you're going to work up to 2 stitches before the total amount that you needed for your length. So I'm just going to work up to row 58. Okay, so I've worked up 58 rows, which is 2 rows before the total number I needed, 60. And as you can see, I switched to this faux fur yarn. I switched after 36 rows, and then I switched back to regular yarn in my last row, my 58th row. One, because it's really hard to see the stitches in this yarn, as you can see. You can kind of feel them, but just so that I could show you guys mostly and make this shoulder part easier, I switched back to regular yarn. Okay, so I am on a purl row. So right now we're going to make our hole for the neck hole, for your neck. So depending on how big your head is, or the head of the person you're making this for, you're going to want to cast off between 20 and 22 stitches. Okay, so I have 48 stitches in my row right now, so I would want to cast off either 20 or 22. I'm going with 20. And if you have an odd number of stitches in your row right now, then you're just going to want to go with 21 so that it's even on each side of the neck hole for the shoulders. So I've already put a stitch mark 14 stitches in because I have 48 stitches in my row. I'm going to do 20 for the neck hole, which leaves 28 stitches, and then divide that by 2, 1 for each side of the shoulder. That would be 14. So what I'm going to do is, I've also already, off the color that I'm using for over the shoulders, taken off my little ball, like I told you guys to take off before. Okay. So we're just going to purl, because we're on the purl row, 14. Perfect. So now we're going to want to cast off 20 stitches, or 21 or 22, whatever you've decided, but I'm doing 20. Okay, so when you're casting off, you always want to remember we're going to knit 2 stitches before we cast off, because we're casting off the second stitch. If you only knit 1 stitch, you're going to cast off one of the stitches that you needed on for your shoulder. So purl 2 stitches, cast off, 2 second cast off. So you're going to count the number that you actually cast off, not how many you're knitting, if that makes sense. So 2 cast offs. Okay. So I cast off 20. So as you can see, the reason I said the number of rows that you actually cast off, not the number of rows that you like knit then cast off, because you're doing 1 extra. So as you can see here, we did a purl into the one where the stitch marker was. That's what used to kind of confuse me sometimes. I would leave too many over here. because we should have 13 stitches over here and 1 over here, because when we continue to purl, this stitch just stays there. Okay. So you should have half of your remaining stitches over here, your cast off, half your remaining stitches still on. So now this is our last row for the number that you need for your total length. So as you can see, our working yarn is still attached to this one, but our second little row over here, half of our working stitches don't have a working yarn attached to them without this hole in the way. So that's where this little bit's going to come in handy. So we're just going to work a couple of rows with that over here. So I'll show you how that's done. So I'm on a knit row, so I'm just going to knit my first half here. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to work the rest of the neck hole and then cast back on to the other side. So basically from this point, we are going to just do the exact mirror image of what we did for the top. So yeah, so this row was a knit row, next row is a purl row. But we're going to do the exact same thing, just work again, work this row, work this row. Okay, so this row we want to attach, just work that in there. We want to attach again to complete the circle of the neck hole. So you're just going to, you should be back on your large working yarn again. On this half, so you'll just work across. Okay, and then whatever number that you cast off before, so mine was 20, you're going to want to add back onto this. So to do that, I just take my pointer finger and kind of push it through. Let's see how I do this. Yeah, push it back so that you're going to create a loop with your working yarn in front and then slip it onto your needle. So push back, slip that onto your needle. And you're going to do that 20 times. So again, you're making a loop, your working yarn is in front, slip it on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You're gonna wanna not have too much tension when you're doing this, otherwise it'll be hard to work into on the other side. So 1, 2. Perfect, so 20. And then you're just going to work into the other side. But with your main working yarn again. Again, you can kind of pull this tighter because that piece was a little loosey-goosey over there. And there we go. And then at this point, if you have extra yarn from that tiny ball that I got you to make, cut that with enough so that you can sew in the end. Get rid of that, and then yeah, you're just going to continue to work doing the mirror image of what you did for the front. And I will see you when you get to 8 rows to the end. Okay, so I've worked all the way down the back, and now I am 1 row. I'm about to work 1 row before the ribbing, so 8 rows from the end. And I know in the beginning I said that we were going to do knit 2 togethers, but I lied. We're actually doing purl 2 togethers, but I'll show you how to do it right now. So remember when we increased a stitch in the 8th row of the sweater, we're going to decrease here twice after 10 stitches again and before 10 to the end. So we're going to purl 10 stitches. Okay, and then we're going to decrease 1. So it's just going to be a purl 2 together. So you're just going to insert purlwise through both of these stitches that are on the left needle. You can see there. Huh. It's kind of tight, but... And voila, purl 2 together. Now just knit until you are 12 stitches from the end. Doo-doo-doo. Okay, so 12 from the end, we are going to again purl 2 together. So insert through both of those. There we go. And then just work to the end of the row. There we go. Okay, and then now you're just going to do our 7 rows of ribbing. So that is the knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl all the way across, and turn and repeat. And then cast off. Okay, so now you've done your 7 rows of the knit, purl, the ribbing. We're going to cast off now. So we're just going to cast off the same way. So we're going to knit 1, purl 1, and cast off. Knit 1, and cast off. Oh. Purl 1 and cast off, and knit 1 and work all the way across like that. There you go. That's your cast off. We'll snip the end there, but as you can see, okay, so now that you've made your piece, kind of the first half, neck hole, second half, the very simple way of deciding how big you want your armholes to be would be face the front. Just slide your sweater over your head and using some stitch markers, just kind of decide how big around your arm you want it to be. This one, I think for the sake of simplicity and because it fits, I'm gonna go to like where I started the fur. Then yeah, just use some stitch markers to kind of pin it together. You can also pin your bottom together just to make sure before you sew the sides together that it's going to fit you. So yeah, that gives you like a general idea. So that'll be plenty of room there for my armholes. That's kind of how the body is going to fit me. So yeah, I'll show you how to then sew the sides together, and then we are going to start crocheting around the armhole. I'm going to show you those steps on a different sweater because this faux fur that I used is going to be really difficult to show you those stitches, but get the same idea because it's going to be the same thing, just on a different sweater. Okay, so as far as actually sewing the sides together, take your yarn needle and whatever color of thread that you're choosing. Okay. So we're going to start with the side, and then you can kind of see here your very edge, I don't know what to really call it, but your like final edge of where you were knitting before, it's a little, you'll probably have like a longer hole and then a bumpier one. So I usually sew from, if you look at this edge, it's not really fully even, but then if you go just the second row in when you're looking here, you can see that all the stitches are nice and even there. So I'm going to start sewing from that stitch, not the outside edge, but just the second part of that knit stitch there. So I'm going to, it doesn't really matter which side you start on. I'm going one down from where my stitch marker is. Just leaving the tail on the inside. Just going to make one full loop to start it to make sure that it's secure. Tie a little knot here. There we go. Now we're ready to start sewing. So how I like to sew my seam to make it kind of invisible here is, so I'll go in through the top of a stitch with my needle, and then out through the one right below it. And then across from there in the row across, I will do the same thing. I go in through the first stitch available and then out through the next one. And then I kind of just go down the whole row like that. So in and out. In and out. Another way you can do this if you really, really hate sewing a seam is turning it inside out and you can also just crochet the seam closed. Okay, we'll sew these ends in and secure it at the bottom here. But for now, I'm just going to cut this. And then we're going to do the exact same thing on the other side. This could probably be pulled a little bit tighter. I haven't really secured it yet anyways, but yeah, so we're going to go do the exact same thing on the other side. Okay, so now that both sides are sewn together, we're going to start on the sleeves. So you're going to crochet the sleeve right into your sleeve opening on your knit piece. Okay, so we're going to take our 6mm crochet hook and the medium weight yarn. I'm just going to chain one onto the crochet hook to start, and then I'm going to insert right where I have the seam put together for the sleeve. That will be our first stitch into the sleeve, and then I'm going to work again into just this second loop in from the outside of the sleeve as I'm working around. So I'm just going to half double crochet into each loop, working around. And then at the end, once you've gone all the way around, you're going to go in to where the seam started again, just on the other side. And then just going to slip through our first stitch there. And there you go. So we've attached where we're going to start crocheting our sleeve. Okay, so now once you have kind of attached where you're going to start your sleeve all the way around, you've done your kind of first round, I'll show you how to do the equation so that you know, one, how many rows you're going to do for your sleeve. I've already done the sleeve here, but how many rows you're going to do, and how often you're going to do a decrease in your sleeve. So after working all the way around here, this was 46 stitches for me. So I'm gonna write that number down, 46. Okay, and then for my wrist, kind of like loosely around my wrist, if I measure, I kind of want my actual wrist to be 8 inches, but where my sleeves end, I kind of want it thicker than my cuffs, so I'm going with 9 inches. So, okay, so our crochet gauge swatch, if you can remember, was 3 inches by 3 inches, and that was 11 stitches by 7 to 8 rows. So I'm going to use 7.5 as my number to determine length. So yeah, so my sleeve measurement was 18 inches. So we're going to take 18 divided by 3, because that's the number of inches we used in our gauge swatch, times 7.5. So 45 rows is how many rows I'm going to do. And then to figure out how many or how often we need to do our decreases, we are going to take our number that we have, our number of stitches around our sleeve, so 46. Subtract my number of stitches that I wanted around my wrist, so 32. So 14 decreases is how many decreases that I have to do, and I have 45 rows to do that in. So 45 divided by 14, 14 equals, so 3.21 basically. So if you get a kind of odd number like this, we're just gonna round down to 3. So I'm going to do a decrease after every 3 rows, as I like to kind of alternate sides that I'm doing it on. So I'm going to do it by half numbers. So I'm going to do a decrease after 2.5 rows, and then my next one I'm going to do after 3.5, and then 2.5 again, and then 3.5 again. So it'll average out to every 3 rows. It'll just not, that way all my decreases won't kind of be all on the same side, because I find that kind of, it might distort the shape of the sleeve a little bit, but it's really up to you how you want to do it. But yeah, just make sure that if you are on a number that's not on an even number or on a 0.5 of a number, you're rounding down to the closest 0.5 or even number, to make sure that you get all of the decreases in, and then you can kind of just stop decreasing when you get to the amount that you need at the end. Okay, so starting your cuff, you're going to chain 5, and then we're going to half double crochet into the second loop from our hook, and each loop across. And 4. So basically 4 stitches wide is how wide we're going to make our cuff. So then you're going to chain 1 and turn, and again half double crochet into the first stitch. We're going to go into both loops. Four. Chain 1, turn. We're just going to keep working like so until our cuff is the desired length. Once your cuff is the desired length, mine is 20 rows, which is 8 inches. You're going to, after you've done your last row, chain 1 and turn. Then you're going to take the bottom, your first row, fold it up in behind, and then crochet, single crochet into your top layer and your bottom layer. That's going to connect it and make it a circle. Pull that out. And then when you turn this around the right way, that's going to make your cuff. Okay, so to attach the cuff, you're going to want to turn your cuff inside out so that the little bit of ribbing there or the seam is on the outside. Then you're going to want to slip it around the end of your sleeve with your end of your sleeve right side out. Sometimes I'll just tie these strings here together to keep it in place. And then you can also use some stitch markers to kind of evenly place it, because you'll probably notice that your sleeve is a little bit wider than your cuff. So I'm just gonna kind of put a stitch marker here. Put one here. One here. And then these are the two edges that we're going to attach. That way we're going to sew them together on this side here so that when we flip it over, the seam is on the inside. Okay, so you're going to find your yarn needle and thread some string onto it. And then start over here where I've already kind of attached. That way you can attach your loose string to one of these as well. We'll sew all these in after. Okay. And then kind of just, you can sew however you want to sew, but I'm just gonna make this easy and go over, just kind of over and through. You can't really go stitch per stitch necessarily because your cuff and your sleeve aren't going to be the exact same length, but that's why we put these little anchors so that it bunches at a bit more of an even rate. And there we go. Going to tie off this, and again we'll sew these ends in at the end, but I'll just show you. Now you have your cuff attached inside there. So you're going to do that on both sides. Okay, so to attach the hood, you're going to want the hood right side out. There we go. And then you can lay it like this, and basically we're going to attach where we want to sew on with stitch markers. So kind of the center back of the sweater, we're going to put on the center back of the hood with a stitch marker. And then we're going to take the front. You can kind of count in to make this perfectly accurate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay. So 12 stitches in, we're going to attach where the front of our hood is going to go. And then the other front center, the other side of the hood. There we go. And then on the side here, attach the side. you get the idea. We're going to attach it in a few places so that when we're sewing it on, kind of like the same as the sleeves, if it bunches, it'll at least be even. Perfect. So when I sew this on, I'm going to sew into the outside loop here so that the little bit of the rim is on the inside. But I'm basically going to I'm just going to start from in behind here. And just kind of the same as I did. Same as I did when I attached the two sides together. So I'm gonna go in on one side and then out the other. And when I go into the blue, again, I'm gonna go in and out on the same one. This will kind of put the seam, it'll force the seam into the inside, so it'll be a little bit more invisible. So we're just gonna do this all the way around. I'm just gonna also kind of sew in the corners of this open part to the same spot where the same spot where I started and ended. So that one. And that one. Okay, now I'm just gonna sew in all of the ends. Okay, so once you've weaved in all the ends, the final step is just the string for the hood. So I chained 180, which is probably good enough. If you want longer strings, maybe chain 200, or chain until you think that your string is long enough. And then we're going to weave it starting on the outside, and then just weave it in to the last row before we kind of made this edging. So it'll be the row that has the double crochets in it. At the start here, it's kind of hard to find where that row is, but so we're just going to kind of weave through here. Perfect. So once that's all done, And kind of just double, triple knot the ends of these and snip them off. Okay, so if you were not adding a hood to your sweater and you're just doing it by the video, I'm going to show you how to finish off the neckline here. So you're going to need circular needles because you'll be knitting in the round a couple of rounds to finish off the neckline. So we're going to start on the back, which will be where you have the stitches that you had cast on when you were finishing after the neck hole. So basically what I'm going to do is look for where the stitches are going to have the loop. That's where I'm working into. So I'm going to be working into this space, if you can see. So there will be two pieces here. We're going to work into that. So we're just going to take our working yarn, kind of hold the tail here that you can secure in better later. We're just going to put our needle in right above where the teardrop shape is there. Kind of just pull your working yarn through there. So again, you're just going to insert above your little teardrop into both loops there and pull your working yarn through so that eventually you'll do this again. You might have to loosen up the hole a little bit because it's going to get tight the more you work into it, because the there we go. So we're just going to continue working around. Kind of show you what to do once you're off the back part here. So as you're working across, you'll notice that kind of tightens up. It'll be a little harder to just get into that hole because the yarn is being pulled by the one that you've already attached, but just kind of loosen it up. Okay, now you've gotten to where there's a couple stitches on the side here, so basically just going to work into this loop that's beside the stitch that I'm on. And then this one here again. So okay, so you'll see there I didn't really work into the side of every single stitch. This is going to tighten up my neckline a little bit here. But yeah, I basically worked into the first one, the middle one, the last one there. Okay, now you're on the front side, which was where you cast off when you were making the neck hole. So here you can see we're doing the same thing where you can see the teardrop part. You're just going to insert right above it to pull your yarn through. And we're just going to work across. Doing that. So as you can see, where we are going to have our work, our stitch opening, it will be above the previous stitch. Okay, another way of doing this to make it easier on you, if you would like to, if you're having a hard time putting the needle through, you can always use your crochet hook, insert it to where you want, pull your yarn out and slip it over your needle. So insert it, pull your yarn out, slip it over your needle. And then kind of just tighten up the slack if you do it this way. Okay, so now that you've worked on your yarn around every stitch around your neckline, you're just going to work around in a knit, purl, knit one, purl one, knit one, purl one. I have 46 stitches on right now, so mine will work out an even number. If you have an odd number, then right at the end you can just knit 2 together or purl 2 together to finish out your row, so that you can repeat this, because we're going to do 3 rows of this. When you get to the start of your row, just repeat. Make sure that in your next row, your knit stitches are on top of your knit stitches and your purl stitches are on top of your purl stitches, so that it's kind of creating a ribbing. Thanks for checking out my video today, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any problems or questions, feel free to message me. You can leave a comment on here, or you can also contact me on Instagram. My link is here. When you finish your sweaters, I'd love it if you guys tagged me in your pictures, because I love to see what you're working on, and let me know what kind of stuff you guys want to make in the future. Also, make sure that you subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss my videos in the future. Yeah, I'll see you next time.